Anthony, in trying to discern the nature of reality, you have to deal with the theistic hypothesis that there is some transcendent being. And one way to look at that is to see religion and to see what its claims are. But it's important to, if we're looking at religion, to see how it developed. And the claim is, from evolutionary psychology, that one can explain the totality of religion, and thus it would be, at least to a large degree, undermined. How does that process work? How do you begin to look at religion today and see how evolutionary psychology can explain the phenomenon?
I don't think evolutionary psychology by itself is going to tell us the whole story. It's going to tell us a very, very important and central part of the story about the way that the human cognitive structures are built and how they work. And this relates to the fact that because we have a long maturation process, a long childhood, we need to be very credulous. We need to believe everything. We need to impose interpretations even on random blots, as in a psychological test. We need narratives. We need structures. And we're doing this all the time. We're always looking for explanations and we're looking for frameworks. And that means that in ages, and they've been most of the human story to date, it's only the last few centuries that we've had proper science, in all those ages, those attempts to find structure and explanation have led very naturally and readily to the religions. And religions have a deep metaphysical aspect to them, purporting to give us explanations. So in the structure of the human psyche itself, we find reasons why we have some propensity to believe. But there are also historical and sociological reasons, which I think have to do with just the accidents of history. You began your question by saying, we have to take the theistic hypothesis seriously. I might say, well, it's only for historical reasons that we do. It's only for historical reasons that we're not now taking the astrological hypothesis seriously or the magical hypothesis seriously. Over time, we found that things which for many, many centuries, many millennia, indeed, in the case of astrology, were regarded as powerful tools of explanation have come to be abandoned or come to be marginalized just because the credibility of them has been lost. This may very well happen to religion itself. But because of the way that the religious and temporal powers over time in history have found mutual support so significant that these institutions have survived. So they've evolved. You know, a Christian today in the 21st century would not recognize the Christianity of medieval times, and certainly not vice versa, because the churches and the religions themselves have evolved, added on new things and lost other things in order to survive. So it's a twin-track story: human psychology, the credulity, the need for stories, and the institutional historical story about how the religions themselves have evolved.
So if we look at the historical development of religion, why has it taken such forms in different countries, where one of the big problems of religion is the contradictions and diversity of religion in the world. Everybody has to face that. Maybe the Buddhists don't because they have less of a claim on some absolutism. But most religions have to deal with that contradictory nature. So taking an evolutionary psychology approach, how do you see the different emergences of fairly, they all believe in something transcendent, but they have radically different expressions of it?
Well, it's true they have radically different expressions at, as it were, a superstructural level, but at a slightly deeper level, it's, I think, reasonably clear that they share commonalities. And the commonalities in question are that these are efforts to make sense. They're efforts to provide an explanation, to impose a kind of conceptual grid on things that organizes it for us so that we can think about it, we can comprehend it. I mean, the idea of indefinite margins, that we don't know where they end, of time going on forever before us and time going on forever after us, for example, or infinities of space, loose ends, troubling to most people, not to scientists, but to most people they are.
Oh, I think to scientists too.
Well,
I'm troubled by it. At least I think I'm a scientist by background. You're not troubled by the loose ends of infinity in all directions?
I think they're terribly exciting. This is the drive behind.
Well, your exciting is my troubling.
But the drive behind looking for better explanations or for greater understanding. And indeed, what's so interesting is that the thought that we might be able to get incrementally by really hard work, deeper and deeper insights into nature, let us say, seems to me so different from the one that says, here is a truth, about nature, which we can receive and which we can premise in our lives and we can trust.
So you see that as a commonality of all these religions, even though this superficial superstructure looks like they're contradictory.
That the contradictions even are not that great, actually, because you think about Judeo-Christian tradition and Islam, which springs from an aspect of that tradition. It's a very young tradition in human history. And for many, many tens of thousands of years beforehand, we had a form of animism, I suppose, which was this imputation of agency to things in the world. You look at what the 19th century colonists came to call Hinduism, which in fact is a great family of different quasi-animistic religions, in the sense that they talk about agencies, powers, and truths in nature, which may be expressions of the same one. You know, the many-armed goddess, in fact, doesn't have many arms, she just has many powers, that kind of idea. You look at Buddhism or Jainism, which are in their purest origins, not religions at all, but philosophies. They don't have transcendent beings. And there are quite different approaches.
But they do have a transcendent consciousness of sorts.
Well, in the case that, in the case of Theravada Buddhism, there is the idea that your own consciousness might be re-embodied later on, unless you can escape that cycle and merge back into the great oneness of things. The great oneness of things, of course, is not conscious. That's exactly the enticement, that you can escape, having to think about anything or feel anything. But they're all of them share that one deep commonality, which is an attempt to make sense, and that is distinctive of us as human beings. We want to make sense of things.
What you're doing is actually quite consistent with a number of philosophers of religion, believers, who attempt to deal with the contradictions between religions, and the argument that you're giving me now is precisely the ones they give, to say where each of the great religions are somehow sensing a different form of the ultimate thing, the ultimate real in some way. Of course, you're using that same data and coming to a different conclusion, that they're all deluded, or they're all expressing a human's evolutionary psychology. But others would take that same data and conclude that there is not a contradiction in religion, which other people use to attack religion, yourself included. They would take that data and say, no, there is this commonality, that forget the contradictions. There is this deep, transcendent kernel that they all have in common. So it's the same argument, and then split at the end to a different conclusion.
Well, with respect, it's not quite the same argument, because my argument starts from the thought that human beings sharing a basic human nature are sense-making, explanation-seeking creatures, and that prior to the rise of science, a very natural way to do this was to do it in terms of there being agencies. Whereas what your theologians, I think, are all saying is that actually these are different approaches to the same truth, which is that there is a transcendent entity in some way. But by the way, and again, it's an historical, sociological fact, this is quite a recent move on the part of theologians wanting to be irenic and make peace between what historically, of course, have been very, very competing views of things, even to the point of war and bloodshed, that the others had false gods and mine is the true God. Now they're all the same God, but just looked at in different ways. And so this is a convenience, I think, of a globalized world.